So hello and welcome to the second episode of People of Participedia, an interview series where we sit down with individuals in the Participedia network to explore the recent projects they're working on related to public participation and democratic innovation. My name is Jennifer Wallace. I am speaking to you today from the lands of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, and these are the lands governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement in what is currently called Canada. With me today, we have Dr. Fiona Anciano, Associate Professor in Political Studies at the University of the Western Cape. Dr. Anciano has explored and shared valuable research on the topic of democratization and civil society within her own projects at various research centers and in various lecturer positions as well. She has authored many books and articles. Most recently, she co-authored the book Democracy Disconnected, Participation and Governance in a City of the South in 2019, and co-edited the book Political Values and Narratives of Resistance, Social Justice, and the Fractured Promises of Post-colonial States, published in 2021. In addition to all these significant pursuits, Dr. Anciano is also a researcher with our Democratic Accountability Cluster here at Participedia. And she's here today to share some of her recent experiences in community engaged work and participatory projects that she's working on. So welcome, Dr. Anciano, and thank you for taking the time to share some of your experiences and your research with us today. So we will start with your work on the Lockdown Diaries project in Cape Town. Could you tell our audience a little bit about this project?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me on this engagement platform. It's great to be able to share some of our learnings. So yeah, in March 2020, South Africa went into hard lockdown, and it was very hard. Everybody had to stay home. You weren't even allowed to walk out of your house unless you were specifically going to get groceries. And as we had, I think we had 2 or 3 days to get ourselves ready for the lockdown, I happened to be driving across the country and watching everybody shopping and preparing. And it struck me that if there was ever a time to understand how citizens and residents, particularly in vulnerable areas, respond to times of crisis, this was it. And I had done research in the past on how residents in what we call informal settlements in South Africa, in India you would call slums, shack settlements, how they dealt with a crisis such as a fire, for example. And that research had led me to think, why not understand what people are going to do in real time? And so I then thought, well, I can't do this myself. So I contacted some colleagues I worked with, Sarah Jane Cooper-Knock, she was at the University of Edinburgh, and then some of my postgrad students. I work with some excellent PhD and master students in Cape Town. And we brainstormed and we decided the only thing we could do were WhatsApp diaries, and that we needed to reach out to our networks. And so we thought we'd start small and just do a sort of speak to about 10 people through WhatsApp diaries in one informal settlement called Imizamo Yetu. And then it kind of grew from there, because we were very fortunate to get some quick short-term funding from University of Edinburgh. And we were able to then hire some research assistants and also create a stipend for participants. So very quickly, we went from 10 people on WhatsApp diaries to 70 across the whole city. And we developed a methodology of looking at different residential types. So we moved beyond just slum settlements to actually getting diaries from residents in wealthy areas. We had different respondents from occupied buildings. We had a whole range of demographics, age, gender, and yeah, so we started off with actually asking everybody a prompt question. So we would, as a team, meet on a Monday and we'd come up with 3 prompt questions for the week, and then we'd get 2 to 3 WhatsApp responses to a prompt question from 70 people every week. Yeah, and we did that for 16 weeks. So that was the diary project, and the prompts were all very much around real-time experiences of living through COVID, but specifically actually living through a lockdown. And it was very interesting because actually at the time, it wasn't COVID, the illness, that people were dealing with. We didn't really even have that much COVID. It was only 10, 14 weeks into the project where the illness became an issue people spoke about. It was really what it's like to live under lockdown conditions with no employment, no income, limited access to food, all the realities you've got to deal with in the rapidly changing context.
That's really interesting. You were able to get such a wide range of perspectives on this in real time. Given that our audience is sort of interested in participatory projects, could you elaborate on sort of how you actually recruited participants to contribute to these diary pages? And were there any sort of challenges or obstacles in recruiting, sustaining, and you said it was for 16 weeks, was it? So in maintaining the project overall, maintaining interest from the participants?
Yeah, I mean, so I think my first pointer would be that you couldn't do this kind of research if you didn't have existing networks and you hadn't done research before. So almost all the participants we engaged with were people we had built levels of trust with. We tried not to use personal friends because that's, you know, we didn't want to cross that boundary. So, we also certainly didn't want to be, everyone was anonymous. It was completely anonymized. So we had to make sure that the data coming in could never be attributed to anyone, and that in many cases, even we as researchers didn't know who was saying what, because there was a lot of sensitive information around actually breaking laws, you know, around acknowledging that you had broken curfew, etc. So we were trying to keep that very anonymous. But what we did is we built on existing networks of research we'd done specifically in informal settlements and then in other occupied buildings, for example. So I think I'm quite fortunate in that, and this might be interesting to some of Participedia observers and listeners and members as well, is that I'd been running a work integrated learning postgrad module, or you might call that a community engagement module. It's called different things in different areas. But basically I had postgrad students who were working with NGOs, and half of the module would be theory and writing as you normally would, but half of the module would actually be an internship in a specific NGO that was linked to a development project in Cape Town. So through those kind of experiences, so some of the people, the research assistants on the project had been part of that, that postgraduate module. So they had built networks already in these community areas. They weren't from there, but they had built research networks. So they could immediately reach out through their postgrad module they'd been a part of. One of the other research assistants was someone who'd worked quite closely with a range of NGOs in informal settlements. And so he reached out to the NGOs and said, who do you know that would be interested? So it was a snowballing approach. And we had to do that given we couldn't go and do randomized sampling. So we had to use a snowball approach. Yeah, and I think it did work quite well, because in the end, we always wanted to have a good balance of demographics, particularly gender. And somehow we ended up 50-50. That was slightly miraculous, actually. It just, we did our stats and we were like, sort of in week 2, and we're like, wow. So sometimes things just work and you get lucky. We did realize we didn't have enough older members giving us feedback. So we had to do a bit of recruitment, and we had to then specifically look for the right people through the connections. And then obviously it was quite important that we wanted to remunerate our participants for their time. I mean, it was 3 WhatsApps a week, so you're not spending hours doing this, but it's still an emotional time, and you're still having to give of yourself and having to think quite deeply. The questions they were never personal, but they did require you to think about the context you were living through. And obviously you had to, use data, even though it was very minimal data. So we gave a weekly stipend to each participant through where we just did a bank cash transfer to their phone. So I'm sure you can do that in other places in the world. In South Africa, you just have to send off cash to someone's phone and they can claim that voucher at any shop or at their own bank. And I think that made a difference as well in terms of how did we sustain our responses. And we had, I'd say of the 70 participants, we probably actually had around 80, but we never had more than 10 over the 16 weeks actually drop out. So we consistently maintained 70, and we consistently maintained a core of, I'd say, 40 to 50 responding to every single WhatsApp. Not all 70 responded to every WhatsApp for various reasons. And partly that was due to the excellent team I was working with, and that we followed up and we gave support and we asked the prompts, nicely, but we were always there. And I think partly the stipend we were giving actually was allowing a lot of people to feed their family at a time when they'd lost their work. many of our respondents had precarious employments, and it wasn't salaried work, and now suddenly you can't leave home. So if you're a casual laborer, it was a huge issue. So I think that made a big difference as well. And I think the other reason we kept people on is because it's actually quite easy to respond to WhatsApp. We do it, all day, every day. So I think it was I didn't know of any projects beforehand that had ever used WhatsApp as a method, and it worked surprisingly well. Administratively, it was a bit of a nightmare, I won't lie. Took a lot of time, and it was a steep learning curve. But I think from the participants' perspective, actually, it was quite a useful way of engaging. And at the end of the project, we did one of our last prompts were, have you found this useful? What is your view of having done these diaries? And that was really heartening, because so many of the respondents said, actually, this was the space I got to debrief, I got to think. In fact, it felt like a kind of almost like a therapeutic process in some ways. And particularly because the information wasn't assessed or analyzed in their view. We did upload websites, blogs all the time. And so we shared all of that with them. People could go and read. And everybody knew what their acronym was. So everyone had their own little name, but they didn't know anyone else. So they could go and see themselves in print on the website, which was quite good as well. And I also published, I think, about 7 blogs in media, in South African media, international media, UK based, all around. So I think that was quite nice as well, that people got to see that actually what they said was actually out there and being read as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Seems like it was of great value to the participants and to yourselves on the research team. And I really like that important point about compensating for emotional labor. I think that's something that in these community engaged projects needs to be very much considered and incorporated into the projects when possible. So do you feel that the sort of overarching goals of this project have been fulfilled at this point? From what I understand that you said here, the actual diary pages have been completed, but is there any sort of ongoing work or ongoing goals, or is this a sort of completed project in terms of reflecting on the intentions of the project itself?
Are any projects ever completed in academia? I don't know. I think I'll be 80 and thinking, oh, I never quite finished that project from 1925. So no, it's not completed, because there's, one of the challenges is, I think, is that we spent a lot of time and effort in gathering the data and thinking carefully on how to frame not only all the diary pages. I think there were more than 30 to 40 diary pages on our website, but then the 7+ analysis pieces, the blogs. And we put a lot of thought into those because they were real time, and we wanted to be careful on our analysis, and we worked very hard on those. And then actually what we didn't do was the journal publications. And so I think that's the one thing, we thought about a book, we thought about journal publications. And in the end, actually, the diaries didn't really lend themselves to journals. They will in time. So I think what I would say is that we've had to be, I think, a bit gentle on ourselves as a research team and go, it's okay, we didn't generate those 10 output points. Actually, that wasn't the purpose of the project. And that the data we've got there has fed into our thinking, analysis, it's fed into the broader discourse, and it's also allowed us to think about other projects we want to do moving forward. It's also allowed us to think long and hard about methods and research methods, which has been great. And I've certainly engaged with lots of colleagues around research. So I think that's a tangible output. But it's a tough one when you're an academic trying to juggle all of these balls. But it has led to working on now a new project that started on the 1st of March that's funded by the Urban Studies Foundation, looking at civil society understandings and practices of resilience, and actually interrogating what this concept of resilience even means during COVID. And so that the Lockdown Diaries directly related to now building further and deeper. We've also done quite a few long follow-up interviews with our participants, actually sat face-to-face with them, mask to mask with them, and got the backstory and got the context, because the diaries, what they give you is a snapshot. And I think that's why it's quite hard to turn them into journal articles, because what they don't give you, and I'm a qualitative researcher, is that longitudinal understanding, that deeper context, the situational analysis. So that is something we have been doing. and will continue to do. Yeah.
That's great to see the value in the project itself as well, sort of as an archive is sort of how I see that as well. And if you're collecting these sort of longer stories as well, you're just adding to the archive, which is fantastic. And it's easily accessed online, the Lockdown Diaries, which is fantastic. We'll link that in the caption for those watching to check out some of the diary pages and the analyses on there as well. So just to shift a little bit to another project of yours that's using these participatory methods in research, I think your research in general sort of illustrates the kind of range of work and community issues that can be explored or addressed using these sorts of methods, with the Lockdown Diaries being a great example. So shifting to the Scaling Up Off-Grid Sanitation project, could you provide a little overview of this project and your involvement as co-investigator?
Yeah, so this is an interesting project. We're looking at off-grid sanitation in 4 countries. So it's Peru, Haiti, Kenya, and South Africa. And we're trying to understand whether or not what we in South Africa call portable flush toilets. I don't know if anyone listening will actually know what we mean by this, because if you've never seen a portable flush toilet, it's difficult to understand it. But imagine a small portable toilet unit that is, it flushes into a little container, and the container gets taken away every 2 days, cleaned, and get given back to you. And this little toilet will sit in your home, maybe even in your bedroom. So this would be in informal settlements and slums. And it's an alternative to no toilets. It's an alternative to using fields, or it's an alternative. In South Africa, we used to have what was called the bucket system, just a nice swell bucket. So it's not a full flush toilet, and it's certainly not meeting what we would like in standards of sanitation. But it is what is now being rolled out in Cape Town. There are 40,000 portable flush toilets in Cape Town. And so we're now fascinated to understand, how do communities feel about this? Is sanitation working for them? But this project there are a lot of engineers, and there's sanitation specialists, and there are a small number of us who are actually more political economy people. So I'm in the political economy team, and so we're looking at it from that angle. And so one of the questions we're interested in is, how does the rollout of these toilets work? Who services them? Do communities feel that they are sufficient in terms of their upkeep? What is the responsibility of the government in this in South Africa? In the other 3 case sites, the toilets are run by either NGOs or by a private company. So there's South Africa is the only government that actually does it. But in any context, the end user, we still have to understand their level of participation in the service they're getting. So that's the project. I never thought I'd be spending so much time thinking through fecal matter, but here you are. And I think what's been interesting to me is that when you're researching participation or community dynamics or local democracy, it actually doesn't really matter what the lens is. It can be sanitation, it can be fire, it's about how communities engage and respond to the challenges that they're dealing with, the service delivery issues in that time and place. And actually the lessons across all the different lenses I've done generally often are very similar. It's just a different field you have to get to know. So yeah, so that's that project.
That's fantastic. So from what I understand with this project, you used a data collection app to sort of explore the logistics and experiences in terms of these off-grid toilets here. So could you share a little bit about and sort of insight into how and why this type of technology was used for this project? Were there sort of any obstacles and challenges, or is it a great success? Should we all be looking to this sort of data collection app for some of our projects?
So we haven't got any of the feedback in yet, so we're rolling it out. It's taken longer because of COVID. So I'll tell you a bit about why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And so we started, obviously, we went into the communities that we're using, and each country's got its own site of study. And we've done, work with the residents, the users and the non-users. and to get some baseline data. And I think that's crucial. I think, as I was saying, with the Lockdown Diaries, any kind of app-based or technological-based data collection instrument, I don't think you can go in cold. I mean, that's my view. I don't think you can go in cold. I think you need to understand the context, or at least have the networks or understand the ways in which people are engaging with the tool you're going to give them and the topic that you're talking about. And so we did that baseline work. We also interviewed some city officials, and others have interviewed the different players in their field. And then we used that information to develop quite a comprehensive set of survey questions that then got translated and have been translated into a phone app. The phone app, now this is not the technology of how you set up the phone app. I've done all of the practicing around it, not my area of expertise. So we have people in the UK and Australia who've helped develop the app and have done that sort of design part. But the app is now on a phone. So what we've done, and I'll tell the example in Cape Town. So we have 100 people who are going to participate for a year, and they're going to get a series of questions. Some of those questions are going to be ones they have to respond to every week. Some will be every month. And the questions cover a whole range of topics, including general livelihood issues that are drawn from more global standards in, well-being standard type survey questions. And then specific questions to their own sanitation use. That can be as specific as, how far did you have to walk to drop off your container? How many times this week was your container cleaned? Very specific questions. So we're covering quite a broad range of topics, but they're easy to answer. They're quick. There are some text input boxes, but mostly it's just a quick survey where you say yes, yes, yes. Again, every participant is getting a stipend for their time. The challenge is you have to make sure, does a participant have a phone? Do they need a phone? And in any kind of research you're doing, particularly in a vulnerable community where resources are scarce, taking in a bunch of phones is complex. So that's a space we've had to navigate. How do we firstly get the participants? Who are the 100? And we've got 50 users of portable flush toilets and 50 non-users, because we need both their experiences to try and triangulate, and so that's the first step. And that requires, working with gatekeepers, access people, and making sure that so that again has been a long process of getting the right researchers to work with me. I've been in there so many times myself, accepting that we have to work through a gatekeeper because of security issues. The area we're doing our research in is very, very dangerous. And I don't mean that as in you may get something stolen. I mean, there are multiple murders on a regular basis. So, and it can be for something over a cell phone. So we've got to be very careful about that. And so we needed to have, when we're going around the area, we need to be seen, to be watched over, so that my researchers are safe. So that means we did have to work with gatekeepers. So the phones now, we're only actually giving 30 phones, and the other 70 of the participants have their own smartphones. So we download the app. Those who get phones get less stipend, and they get to own the phone. That they basically buy it back. They work it back through their responses over the period of a year. They still get money for data and a little bit of extra, but those who use their own phones, they get a more reasonable stipend that can cover whatever costs they want. That's the other key thing, I think, just to sort of talk about. You raised the question earlier about how we reciprocate people for their emotional energy and their time. And I think one of the lessons we've also learned is that we don't need to give people what we think they want. Like, I'm not so keen on giving data in a data voucher or giving a food voucher. I much prefer just giving a cash transfer. Someone can decide how they want to. If they want to buy data, or if they want to buy food, or whatever that's their choice. I just think there's an autonomy and a rationality to the participants to decide how they want to use it. When I get my salary, I choose how I use it. I don't get given it in, petrol or whatever. So I just think it's fair to treat all our respondents like that. So at the moment we've had to do a lot of piloting, and this is the interesting thing. No one's ever done this before, to my knowledge, in any of the areas I've worked in. It may have been done, but none of the areas I've worked in. So it's taken quite a lot of piloting and weekends to work with our participants to show them how you input and then to get their feedback. So every site did a dry run with 10 to 20 participants using the app on their phones and figured out what went wrong. And then we had to then rejig the whole app And now we're at the point where it's good to go and we're ready to roll it out. So we're just waiting. We'd like to roll it out across all 4 countries at the same time so that we have the same longitudinal data. So we're waiting for everyone to kind of be ready. We're ready in Cape Town. We're good to go, but we're waiting to get everyone off. And then we're going to hopefully actually in the next 2 or 3 weekends start the process. So I'll let you guys know how the data works when we get it back. And the tricky thing obviously is going to be how we analyze it, because it's now 400 data points 3 times a week. That's going to be a challenge as well.
That's so exciting that you're on the cusp of getting everyone involved. Really long-term project, it sounds like. Lots of interesting work ahead for you on it. But yes, we will certainly be coming to you for some updates as you make your way through this project. Really exciting. So in general, you've been sort of involved in a lot of this community engaged research throughout your career thus far. Are there any larger lessons that you've learned? You've touched on many throughout this last 20 minutes or so, but is there any that you've learned that really stick out to you, or that you're sort of in the process of working through related to this type of research that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a continuous learning curve. So I have to be, I'm quite chatty, and I know I've gone over time here, so I'll try and be a bit more succinct. So a couple of thoughts. I think firstly, it's who you work with is crucial. And I've been really lucky to have a great group of graduate students who are not even graduate students anymore. They're now their own academics in their own right, which is the journey we want them to go on, and their own researchers. I keep losing my graduate students to jobs. They keep getting hired. It's very frustrating. And colleagues you trust, and colleagues you can, I think there's a lot of, you need to debrief yourself. This work is not always easy. And I think, you've got to recognize that there can be an emotional energy from yourself and toll as well, because you're not going in this kind of participatory work in vulnerable communities where people need help, and you are representing some kind of resource because you are going in there with resources, whether it's a small stipend or a phone. I think it's quite important to think about how you debrief and protect your own emotional strength. So that's one thing, and that's why I think a team is so important. Don't do it alone. Don't go alone. And even if you're a graduate student and you've got to do your PhD and you're just on your own doing your own research, find a friend, set up a call afterwards, just debrief and make sure you've got people you can talk to about what you're doing. I think the other key thing is, and I learned this from my colleague SJ. We were doing a lot of work in this place called Mzamayetu, a post-fire, and a lot of people were coming to us saying, "Oh, I've got a good idea how to help the fire victims. Let's do this, let's do that." And wealthy people, and we stopped and we thought, what are the unintended consequences of the intervention you want to do? And it's made me reflect a lot on, when you go into an area, you're not invisible and you're not neutral. You may think you are. You may think you're an objective researcher, and you may want to be. But you are bringing in your own baggage, your own positionality, and actually there are always going to be unintended consequences that you actually may not see, but then you'll hear about, or maybe not even hear about. And a lot of that has got to do with power base. So in the areas we work in fact, where all of us live, there's people who've got power, and there's hierarchies, and there's those who control resources and those who don't. And it's far more precarious and far more significant when you're in a very vulnerable area that is a poor area, that you are careful about who you are seen to work with and what that consequence for them may be, and how you balance those demands. So so my second key learning has been, and I would share, think very carefully about who you're going to meet when you go somewhere to do research. Who's going to walk you around? How will that be seen? Who may you be alienating? What position are you putting that person in? What may the expectations on that person now be? And there's no easy solution to that, but it's something that took me a while to kind of start to think about very carefully. And now we go very gently into any area, and we always start with someone that we can try. And I'm lucky because I'm at a university with many students who are from the areas I research. So I'm quite fortunate to be able to find someone who knows someone who lives in the area, who's not a gatekeeper, who's not a positioned person in power, and understand a little bit of the lie of the land from them, and then figure out what to do next. So I guess it's a long way of saying, putting in all that groundwork up front is going to make for much better, more ethical research.
I think that's a really important lesson, like you said, a learning curve, but it sounds like if you're able to sort of foster and rely on your network surrounding you, you can maybe move through that learning curve efficiently. So our last question here related to work within Participedia. So you're a member of the Democratic Accountability Cluster. Is there anything going on within the cluster now or in the near future that you're excited about or working on, or anything we can sort of expect as an audience to Participedia?
Yeah, so it's a very obviously interesting cluster, democratic accountability, big thing. We've had several meetings and discussions with our group, and there are two exciting kind of strains coming out. And the one is the more national level questions. In South Africa, we talk about state capture, for example. I don't think that's a term used elsewhere, but you know, the role of the party and the state merging and corruption, basically. So that, you know, issues around that, whistleblowing, a whole range of national level questions. And there's some people who are going to do some comparative work in that area, which is very exciting. I obviously find that very interesting, but it's not my area of research, and you know, strategically you have to make choices. So there are some participants in the group as well who are interested in local, very local level, so completely other end of the scale, questions of social accountability, which really, you know, many ways of defining that. But I suppose in essence, what we're interested about is what is the role citizens play in holding their local, either politicians, officials accountable, or even other forms of agents who deliver services, even if it's a private company. But what mechanisms are in place for holding local actors with power accountable? And what does that look like? So I'm quite interested in that, and I've got colleagues who are hopefully going to do some comparative case study research and look at what's been done, some good practice and some learnings from Cape Town and other parts of the world, including North America and India, for example. So yeah, so we've got these two scales and we're looking forward to working on both of those.
Those both sound really exciting. We will, again, keep coming to you for updates. There's so much going on in your research, so very exciting. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your work, your insights, your lessons, all really valuable. I'm taking notes for my own research here. I'm sure a lot of people watching are as well. And for those watching, in the caption to the video, you'll see all the recent publications and projects that you can check out of Dr. Anciano's here. So thank you again for sitting down with me here today.
Great, thank you very much for having me, and it's great to be part of Participedia. It's a really important network.